Hey, it's Debbie, and I'm back for another Thursday solo cast to talk about how to fuel train and perform your best for now and for your future self. So, where I left off last time, training the female athlete, mapping it out. I did a little episode last week on how you can focus on nutrition, protein for the female athlete and lifting weights. But let's look at some other things. So, taking up information from different leaders in this space, Dr. Stacy Sims recommends carb intake for female athlete, a little different than others do, but it depends on your workout and the time of your cycle. And if you're pre or postmenopausal, of course, is going to different. So here's what Stacy Sims says. Dr. Sims, instead of worrying about piling enough pasta, Canadian in me, pasta on your plate the night before a big event, eat enough to meet your energy needs. The baseline calorie intake for women, Stacy Sims says 40 to 45 calories per kilograms of body weight. And with that, the carb ranges she recommends based on exercise duration and or intensity. So for a light active recovery day, Stacy Sims aims for 2.5 grams of kilogram. For intense days like CrossFit, aim for 2.5 to 3 grams of carbs per kilogram. For moderate high intensity interval training lasting 60 minutes to 120 minutes, you need 3 to 3.5 grams of carbs per kilogram. Now, for endurance training involving 2 to 5 hours of intense training, depends if you're anaerobic or aerobic, where your heart rate is. Say you're doing long bike ride or long run or swimming, you need at least or in the range of 4.5 to 6 grams of carbs per kilogram. For extreme intense training, 5 hours or more per day, Ironman, you'll need 6 to 7 grams of carbs per kilogram. Now, this is what Dr. Stacy Sims says on women on carb loading. Now, of course, if we go to Dr. Dan Plews, his information is going to be different. So training the female athlete, females have a better endurance in the first half of their cycle. So going back to the last episode of my solo cast, females, the first half follicular cycle towards ovulation, have better endurance. Sprint performance may be best during late follicular ovulation and early luteal. And then during the luteal phase, female athletes want to deload weak, as we've spoken about, because we have a higher RPE, perceived rates of perceived exertion, higher heart rate at specific intensity. Cardiovascular intensity is harder, work harder for the same effort at your rest cycle, and a decrease in maximum endurance in your mid luteal phase. So research does show that jump and sprint performance didn't change noticeably or high intensity sessions, but we don't want too much stress that last week of luteal. So you can do the strength training, lower reps, higher, heavier weight, the first half of your cycle, then transition to a little bit more, less weight, higher reps towards luteal, and then add in more recovery, restoration, the last end of your late luteal cycle. But HIIT training can be in there throughout the program with a little break that last week. So what about, we'll get to carbs for females, but during the high hormone phase, the high estrogen, high progesterone, that's in your luteal phase. We do have a higher than the rest of the cycle. We have a 8% reduction in plasma volume. So our blood's thicker. The heart has to work harder to pump blood around the body. So that's what we talked about before. Previous slide is the same effort, same speed is a lot harder. Heart has to work harder, and we get to fatigue earlier. And I did experience that last month for sure on a long run. Everything was hard and it was hot out. So I was overheating. Now, progesterone is elevated in luteal phase. So that's going to increase our core body temperature, decrease our ability to cool our body, like I just said, experience, and then vasodilation, altered sweating. So training hard in luteal phase, same effort, quicker to fatigue, heat acclimation, hydration needs are increased. So we need to adjust our fueling hydration during luteal phase. Okay. So this is review again, mapping out the changes. So early follicular increased fat oxidation. This is Dr. Dan Plu's Endure IQ program. Said this ovulation, our testosterone and estrogen are at its peak. So lift heavy. And Stacy Sims, Dr. Sims says lift heavy SHIT. And luteal phase, increase and stored and use of glycogen sparing. So we can do more, but we have increase in insulin resistance, decrease in glucose tolerance, food cravings are increased with increase in progesterone, but our metabolic rate is increased highest 14 days post ovulation. And then fasting is a stressor. So we want to limit fasting that last week of the cycle because we are more sensitive to lack of food signaling than men. So it's a stress to us. So that goes to the kisspeptin hormone. We'll get towards talking about one show. And then we want to work on increasing oxytocin, giving more hugs, more love, decrease his cortisol. So we want to support progesterone by increasing oxytocin and watching our cortisol levels. So nurturing phase, Dr. Minnie says. All right, training low, matching training fueling. So I'm recording this when Ironman Hawaii is on for the female race. It's over on my iPad here to the side. And the women are on the bike. So what do they do for fueling? Now, matching fueling and training in Endure IQ, we are low carb, high fat performance endurance athletes. So it's going to be a little bit different for everyone. But if you find carbs for help your performance, you want to choose real whole food sources as sweet potatoes and yams, things like that are from the ground, from the earth, not processed packaged foods. That's not your carbs we're looking for. We're looking for real food. So nutrient timing is key in matching the intensity to your fuel. So example, Dan Plews talks about a 4-hour ride and a run. He would do an S Fuel bar. That's a low carb, slow release energy and a drink. Post workout, larger carb intake meal. That's your liver muscle glycogen tanks get emptied. So lower carb, the high carb later in the meal after that workout. So depends on the intensity. A lot of the examples I know Dan Plews is, I think he still has the record for age group man at Ironman or top age grouper, and he's going to be racing a little bit higher. So you want to match your intensity to your fueling plan. Essential aminos pre, during, and after exercise are suggested. I've done that for years with Hammer Nutrition back when I was racing. I have little pill bags and I put B1, bike 1, first hour, bike 2, and I have it all spread out in little pill bags that I put in my little bento box. And then higher intensity workout days, we want to fuel, as Dan Plews would say, fueling pre-workout with S Fuels bar or just black coffee. So we talk about what to do when I'm working with athletes to figure out their fuel plan is going to be different. This is info from Ben Greenfield on training low, racing high. The key is for someone like an Ironman athlete to keep relatively low keto type of low carb diet during the day. You must look at your genetics. If you're doing a high fat, you want to watch out where those fat sources coming from, since some people have the PPAR genetic SNP or a different SNP that more inflammatory response to higher fat. So some people do. So it's always great to do a genetic test, and they're pretty affordable. Now, if you don't fall into that category, keep a relatively ketotic during the day. So you're showing, like in your biosense, you're showing some ketones, and then that goes in towards race. Then a few days before your race, this is the training low, racing high. That's where you add in, and we talk with Dan Plews recommendations 3 days before the race. Say you're keeping 100, 130 grams of carbs, typical for your normal day. 3 days before you add 50 more grams, and then add a little bit more. And so maybe the day before you're up to 200 grams of carbs, which is still relatively low compared to the standard athlete that eats higher carb diet. So once you are fat adapted, you're training low, your body's trained to search for fat for fuel and spare the glycogen stores for the end of the workout or when you're doing higher intensity. Then a race day, when you add in those carbs, it acts like your rocket fuel. But we want to top off those muscle glycogen stores before the race begins. So that's why we want to add some sweet potatoes, yams, or white rice, safe starches, healthy sources of the carbs. So the muscles soak up the carbs and performance will improve. So you'll have that dual fuel on race day, but you have to deplete the carb beforehand is the key. So fat adapted athletes, training low, keeping low carb, and then stock them up. So S Fuels plan is good fueling options. If you're training, You can use their S Fuels Train. They have 4 different flavors, but that supports your low intensity, long duration training plan. And then on workouts, you're a little more anaerobic surges, maybe some tempo, speed work, race pace work. This is where you might benefit from having their endurance drink mix, the Race Plus, and that's a little bit more slow release energy fuel. And then when you are racing high levels, maybe like I have someone doing a half marathon this weekend and they're going to go higher heart rate than they would do a marathon. I suggested trying more the gel powder in a flask and put that in your pant pocket. So Race Plus powder, and you mix that with water and it makes a concentrated gel for high training racing competitions. So that's some S Fuels examples. So fueling for training. Geez, someone needs to spell check training or racing. Now, here's some different information. There's fasted workouts. Should you fast? That depends on the type of workout. And to get most out of each workout, we want to train low to get superior adaptations. So low intensity training, that 80% of the time, doing low intensity, 20%. Typically, we're doing some high intensity intervals in that workout or separate workout. Push and train the fat oxidation state. So you are burning fat at higher levels up to higher heart rate. So I've said before, when I used to do metabolic testing, cart on clients and myself, and when I was at my peak, I could go up to, well, I was 40 years old, but I could go up to 160, still burn 160 heart rate, and still burn a high percentage of fat before I had my metabolic crossover point. So at one point I remember testing and took a long time to switch over to being into carb burning fuel. So fasted versus fed state, we want to look at depending on the female and male. Taking Vespa, they've had some research studies we talked about earlier this year on a podcast with Peter Defty about the performance gains doing fasted exercise, then adding fasted with Vespa. Now, Endure IQ talks about fueling and fueling for a race. So first meal pre-training is the most important. What you eat influences your fat metabolism and how you adapt to that training as fuel is not available. So fasted exercise, which means not eating any calories before training or not eating foods with high macronutrient content as black coffee or tea. Now, you can keep in that fat burning state by just having some calories, but maybe they're from fat, as putting some fat in your coffee. That keeps you in that fat burning state. But fasted exercise is just coffee, tea, or water. Now, calories before training is not fasted exercise, but you can still keep fat adapted, especially for female athletes. We talk about causing more stress, being more sensitive to stress, and stress can be excessive fasted exercise. So I've given in to experimenting with adding a little calories. My coffee is Laird's creamer and trying some of the heavy cream with the Laird's creamer that has some coconut sweetener in it. So I'm getting some calories, but it doesn't spike my blood sugar because I've tested it with my BioSense and Keto Mojo. So testing out, does my blood sugar stay stable when I have this? So am I keeping fat burning? I'm not stressing my body doing too much fasting. Then there's the other side of it. If you are eating dinner, especially some people eat dinner a little bit later than I would, then that meal will help fuel your morning workout. So often people are still good in adding just the coffee, water, tea before their workout because they had that previous night dinner. Okay, so a little bit more race day fueling tips. S Fuels, I like their charts. They have good information on their website, sfuels.com, I think it is. So low carb, 50 grams, 150 grams a day. Now, if you are working out an hour versus 2 versus 3, 4, 5 hours, the fuel plan will be different if you're a low carb athlete. If you're a higher carb athlete, you may need a little bit more fuel early on because you're burning more carbs than fat for fuel. So your timing on a low carb diet plan, the fat adapted S Fuels Train plus Race Plus that they have would be great for a 4-hour ride. But if you're just doing a 1 to 3 hour bike run, trail run, you might be just good enough with S Fuels Train. So S Fuels tips on a longer race day, pre-race, you'd have S Fuels trained and S Fuels primed. Racing and competing, they suggest having that when you are training versus racing. So training, you'd have S Fuels trained and S Fuels primed for a little caffeine. If you're racing, then you'd have the race plus and the S Fuels primed. Now, you don't want to eat a lot of insulin triggering grains, starch, simple sugars, large amounts of dairy on race morning. Remember, we don't want to shift to carb burning in the beginning of a race. We want to burn fat as a primary fuel and then switch to carbs when we need it. So targeting low carb, they have a keto cereal, eggs, coffee, tea with some fat, some low carb berries. That might be good for you. Or there's S Fuels Life Bar. There's Laird's is coming out with this bar that I've been testing out that really is good, has mushroom adaptogens in it. That's another option. I have shared on my Instagram, Low Carb Athlete, the fasting bar. That's a joke to most people because it's supposed to not break your fast, but it's calories. I find it a great option for simple digestion of fuel, easy to digest fuel for an athlete because it doesn't melt and it has just clean ingredients, no extra garbage that a lot of bars have and a lot of the different sweeteners that are excessive in bars. That is the fast bar. It might be good to test out as well. So complete the first 30 to 60 minutes of your race with no intake of carbs, fuels, and especially just watching Ironman Hawaii right now for the female race. When you're swimming, you're not eating anything. Obviously, you're just swimming and drinking seawater. But so that's why you want to time what you eat before a triathlon more than a marathon. It's more complicated. And then wait after transition, your heart rate's super high because you're running from the swim to your bike through transition area onto the bike. And you don't want to have anything but just maybe electrolyte water until your stomach settles down and you can take in calories. So to me, it's more intuitive or unintentional that I kind of have always followed the rule without knowing it was rule. Complete the first 30, 60 minutes of your race with no intake of sugar carbs. I can't eat right away. So drinking hydration drink as S Fuels Train with some electrolytes in it, first 30, 60 minutes is ideal. So then beginning using fuel as your calories, for example, again, S Fuels Race Plus after 30, 60 minutes of racing or competing at high intensity. Now, if you're doing an Ironman, unless you're trying to win as a professional or top age grouper, you should be burning mostly fat, staying fat burning state on your bike ride. So I don't need as much fuel just to stay hydrated, have some slow, steady release of calories as a slow release starch drink if you do S Fuels or you can. So something like that is good. The Race Plus, I think, is great to try out as well from S Fuels. If you are racing and especially like towards the end of the bike, you want to think on your bike when doing an Ironman, you're fueling on the bike for the run. So you have to remember you have to go 26.2 miles when you get off the bike. So think about that for a run. If you're doing just a marathon, not just a marathon's a lot harder, I think, by itself than an Ironman, then you want to maybe add halfway through your marathon, add this Race Plus type of fuel. So you want to keep that fat oxidation higher. And when you're doing higher intensity, you'll be burning carbs, but less than people that are not fat adapted. So we have that glycogen sparing effect. And then this reduces that GI stress, which goes back to when we originally started 10 years ago talking about a low carb, high fat type of diet for an athlete, endurance athlete, that we don't have to take in all those sugars every 30 minutes. And a lot of times that's going to give you stomach stress and you'll be running to the toilet or you'll be throwing up on the side of the road. So simple sugars, you want to avoid sucrose and instead, look out for different sugars, what you're having in your fuel, and be aware of that slow release. So train and test your products out beforehand. Again, nothing new race day, and everything's always different. If it's hot, or if it's cool and raining, if you're going to be sweating a lot more, it's humid out. So looking at the elevation, the duration, all of that you want to go when we're figuring out a client's fuel plan on race day. And we write it all out and have your A race plan, your B race plan, and your C race plan. More information you can find on S-Fuels on their website about their how to maximize fat oxidation, that they find that half findings of adding some caffeine for mental cognitive focus, heighten maximal fat oxidation during exercise, adding a measured dose of caffeine 30 to 60 minutes prior and during your racing competition. Athletes can use their Prime or some other products if you don't like S-Fuels. Continue Prime optimal focus on competing, ensuring maximal fat oxidation. It continues in seeking support glycogen sparing as much as possible. So you can read more about that on their website and about their race fuels mix. And then you've got their S-Fuels race and faster Prime to help keep burning fat at higher levels. So they have guidelines in there. How to use Race Plus gel. You can find more information. And then I've been experimenting with HVMN, Ketone IQ. So I don't know if you're doing an Ironman, you can shove one of these bottles in your bike bag and your run bag, but taking this a ketone shot halfway through, their protocol is 30 to 60 minutes before exercise as your usual, with your usual pre-workout fuel, and then extend exercise, take an additional serving every 2 hours. So if you're 150 pounds, you have one serving, 150 to 200 pounds, you take 2 servings, and then 200 pounds or higher, you want 3 servings. So that is good information in my podcast out with Lat Monsieur from HVMN, who does the research on it. But the Ketone IQ can help you with athletic performance as it elevates levels of ketones in the blood, which acts as a fuel and alters the way the body uses other fuel sources. And he says that ketones are 28% more efficient as fuel than glucose alone and does not contribute to sugar crashes or insulin spikes. And that enables athletes to sustain peak mental clarity during competitions. And another study found that athletes saw that a 2% increase in endurance after consuming ketones, which may improve performance. So new research coming out, you can use our code low carb athlete to save 10% on Ketone IQ, but super fascinating to check out. So last little bit, matching fueling and training. Top athletes, this is from Endure IQ, took some carbs. So the fat adapted athlete is training low, doing the racing high approach is what we're talking about. Now, everyone's unique. So you want to test your fueling and performance plan before race day. Lack of carb intake, so depleting those muscle glycogen stores while racing can decrease performance. So you want to keep competitive and you want to do well in your race, as I would do in a race, as I try to, beat my last time or place in my age group, that we want to be competitive. So you do need to have some extra carbs when you are racing, but you want to figure that out. So testing your fat oxidation values on a treadmill test or running test, find someone that does PNOE, and bike test is going to be different than run test. So getting your numbers figured out. So where you need to figure out your fuel plan, but also training your gut. So GI stress from too much carb intake is going to lower your fat oxidation rates, and excess sodium plus poor training and high stress all impact the gut. So you want to really reduce stress on your gut by training low carb and racing with a little higher carbs, but really watching that gut health. So tapering for a race, S-Fuels has great information how to train on race day and gel. You can do race day prep. Dr. Dan Plews, this is his suggestion. If you are a fat adapted athlete, you want to gradually increase in carbs pre-race. So in your taper, you're filling your glycogen stores up pre-race. Ongoing, once you're a fat adapted athlete, you're staying in that sweet spot around 100 to 130 grams of carbs per day. And that totally varies. Some people can say 200 to 300 grams. I've heard Ben Greenfield talk about it with different athletes. So it depends on you, and men versus women are different, and what intensity you work out at. 3 days pre-endurance race, tapering before a race. 3 days before, you add 50 more grams of carbs in your evening meal. And then 2 days, you'll go up to 200 grams of carbs total. And then 1 day before the race, you'll have 200 grams total. That's if you are a low carb athlete. So it's going to be different, but whole food sources of carbs. So we're not talking about processed carbs, packaged foods. We're talking about the real thing. So nature's carbs. So another example I saw, training low, racing high method, training your gut for race day. Depends on your race goal. If you're trying to compete in your age group or you're just trying to finish, it's going to be a little different. So men versus women, how many calories an hour they need on the bike versus the run are going to be different. So we can figure out that math and again, experiment in your training rides and brick workouts that come up, 6 weeks before race day. And hopefully you have some B races you're doing along the way before your big A race. So test out this fueling plan. So long training workouts can be with minimal fuel plan, but I think people are doing too much fasted workouts and that's going to cause more stress for the female, even though you feel good on it. But just realize that you could, yes, I can go fasted and go a long time without eating, but is that a stress for me? Is that impacting my performance? So we want to individualize all this information. So a tapering before the race, 3 weeks to 1 week, taper decreases by 50%. You're keeping 100% of your normal training intensity. And as I just said, testing your fuel plan out on those key training sessions, or if you have some practice races you can do. So nothing new race day. Dan Plews, Dr. Dan Plews, you can find more on Endure IQ, but this is his kind of taper week schedule if you're looking at the slideshow on the Low Carb Athlete YouTube channel. And then tips for tapering tips again is 50% reduction in training load with maximum of intensity. So shorter workouts, keeping the intervals, and then resting more. Increasing the daily carb intake up to 150 to 200 grams, 2.5 days before the race. Race day morning, avoiding foods that spike insulin and inhibit your fat burning as a super starch to top off those liver glycogen stores. Race with some carbs if competing and over that zone 1 or 2 long distance training. And aim 50 to 60 grams of carbs if you are racing per hour on a bike every 20 minutes. Now that's Dan Plews' suggestion, Dr. Dan Plews on Endure IQ. To me, that's too much for my body to handle. I'm a female, he's a male, and he's racing. So you have to adjust and say, maybe I just need 20 grams an hour. And then towards the end of the bike, I might need more. And then the run is going to be different too. So listen to your body. So S Fuels, check it out. Their charts, helpful. And their train I really like is just barely any calories, is just some fat, a little bit of protein, sodium, potassium, and glutamine to help protect your gut. So you can check out their training for low intensity. If you're doing a 1 to 3 hour workout, has some MCT oils and electrolytes. And I said glutamine for your gut health and muscles. They're training higher intensity 1 hour before you start. You can do their S Fuels primed. And then first 30 minutes, you have 1 serving of S Fuels train. And then after 30 minutes, another 30 minutes, you have 1 serving of Race Plus. So if you're doing a high intensity interval sessions and you're kind of feeling like I've been doing them all fasted, I'm kind of sluggish, I'm not feeling energetic. And then we might want to experiment having fueling. Because if you're like me, I've been doing a lot of fasted and really realize, okay, I'm not getting faster. Well, maybe you just need to eat something. Maybe you need some fuel. So that's it for today. We'll go into a little bit more racing fuel plan ideas. This is what I go through with my clients, race day fueling. If you're fat adapted versus carb burning athlete, and what are some things you can eat before your race day morning? Maybe it's some avocado. I mean, I can't eat a lot of protein beforehand. So some different suggestions I'm placing in my protein post race. If you're doing something like Dan Plews does a porridge, and some 2 scoops of highly modified starch, we'll make sure that's properly soaked and sprouted. So proper preparation of any seeds, nuts and seeds you want to be careful on, as the lectins, phytates, oxalates can bother a lot of people's guts. So pre-swim, post-swim, bike, run on race day, it's going to be different for everybody. Testing beforehand, figure out what your numbers are helpful. And more information will be coming to the website, debbiepotts.net, and find out, okay, what should I try? And let's work on figuring out your fuel plan. So Let me know if you have questions. I will be doing little mini videos along the way. Always make sure to recover and repair and prioritize that protein, get those amino acids in there, and then you should be good to go if we pay attention to that recovery. So let's talk soon. Let me know your questions or what you want me to cover on the next Debbie solo cast for the Low Carb Athlete podcast. Thanks for listening and watching.